Hello, Scott Marcus of the ISA, back again with another look at screenplay formatting, and this time I wanted to take a look at writing character descriptions. So this video came about because just recently we put a video out that is a comparison. It's a first impressions look at the original Ghostbusters back in 1984. What did the world see for the first time as they were introduced to Ghostbusters, but also what did the world read, or the Hollywood world read as they were getting introduced to Ghostbusters? So we did a little comparison of those two. A really fun video, short video. If you haven't seen it yet, I will put a link to it at the end of this video and in the description. But one of the things that immediately caught my attention was how wordy the character descriptions were. I, for example, am of the mindset that I like to put as little in there as humanly possible. In my opinion, if there's something important that the audience should know about the character, it should come out in their dialogue. And if it never comes out in their dialogue, well, then there needs to be some more work done to make sure it does come out in their dialogue. But again, that's just my mindset. We are going to take a look at a whole bunch of the most famous characters throughout film history, really focusing on modern history, of course, because we want to see what the current trends are in the industry. But it would be fun to look at some of the most iconic characters back through time. I wouldn't mind doing a part 2. So if you guys have any ideas or requests for who we should look at if we were to do a part 2, definitely leave that in the comments below. And also, always, if you have any screenplay formatting questions, how would this type of a scene written? What if this happens in a film? How would it look on the page? We will answer all of those kind of questions with follow-up videos. So I've opened up Final Draft, and as I was mentioning Ghostbusters, this is how I would have introduced Peter Venkman. Of course, this is that famous scene where Bill Murray is administering the ESP tests with negative reinforcement, electroshock therapy. What a fun movie this was. So again, I try to be as minimalist as possible when it comes to a character description. Peter Venkman, 30s, dressed professionally, but with a far less than professional swagger. Sits behind an archaic contraption. Okay, by the way, typing and writing at the same time when you're coming up with the idea in the moment is odd. So I took a very small amount of that. I address, okay, he's in his 30s with Bill Murray's hairline. I never really know how old he is. He's dressed professionally, but you get a little bit of an idea that he's got this weird cocky swagger. It doesn't even say that he's cocky, but you could just tell that he's not very professional. But right away, we get into the action. So for me, I want everything to come out through his actions, how he handles, you know, the upcoming dialogue that's coming out. Let's see how it was done in 1984. Now, we have to remember that when Ghostbusters was made, it was a fully packaged deal. This was not the case of somebody who was trying to write a screenplay and then hopefully sell it to a studio and eventually they would go to casting. They had their core actors already in place. So realistically, they could have just said, Peter Venkman, he's the guy that Bill Murray is playing. But still, that aside, let's take a look. Venkman is an associate professor, but his rumpled suit and the manic gleam of his eye indicate an underlying instability in his nature. However, while a little short on academic credentials, Venkman is long on confidence, charm, and salesmanship. Okay, so that to me, that's not how I would teach or tell somebody to write something, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. You do get a ton out of this. You get some elements that you think are way too novel-like. Underlying instability of his nature. This is not how I would think to write something, but obviously this movie has gone on to be a classic, and it gave Bill Murray a ton of insight also. Even without doing a full character breakdown, there's a lot of information here that he got to work with. Again, it's more wordy than I would want to do, but ultimately, it's just a couple of sentences. As long as we are talking Ghostbusters, let's go through a couple of others really quickly. Egon Spengler. Spengler is a real egghead, a new wave Mr. Spock who single-handedly got Venkman through graduate school. So wow. So first off, a new wave Mr. Spock is, what a great line. But single-handedly got Venkman through grad school. There is so much established right there, which watching the movie, is it important that we establish that here? Probably not, because I never knew that their relationship went back that far. Spengler is incredibly intelligent, but amazingly dense at the same time. At the moment, he is listening to a table using it. Okay, so then it gets into action. So, you know, that line I would say is kind of superfluous. Incredibly intelligent, but amazingly dense at the same time. I think that would be stuff that should come across in the actual dialogue. Okay, and we're talking Ghostbusters. I have to take a look at Rick Moranis' character, Louis Tully. Generally speaking, a side character would get a lot less detail in their character description. Let's see what they gave for Louis. Louis Tully peeks his head out of the door. Louis is a shy nerd, hopelessly in love with Dana. This gives him a little bit of backstory, but shy nerd is really all that is needed there. No indication of age, anything like that. Stature, we know from history that this was played by Rick Moranis, but it was written for John Candy. So had they actually really pigeonholed themselves into describing what John Candy looks like, maybe casting never would have looked to somebody like Rick Moranis to take that role. And that is something that I think is very important. The more unnecessarily detailed you are in the character description, the more that might limit you in casting later. You might eliminate people that would be great actors because in the moment when you were writing the screenplay, you had an exact idea of the physique or whatnot of the character. But realistically, if John Candy and Rick Moranis can play the same role, well, there's a lot of flexibility in what actor can play what role. Okay, let's take a look at two very diverse female leads from Devil Wears Prada, written by Eileen Brosh McKenna, who I had the great fortune to be able to interview at the Austin Film Festival a few years ago. So first, we'll look at Andy, who was played by Anne Hathaway. It's an interesting one because, well, as much as the character description is about her, it's about what she isn't, too. Steam on a Mirror, Wipe Off by Andy Sachs, 20s, pretty but not glamorous, smart but green, hair up in a towel, brushing her teeth. We intercut Andy getting ready, and we see 4 other girls getting ready, too. So I made sure in this one to show the different scenes. Scene 1, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I, because it's kind of hard to visualize if you're not seeing that there's an actual break, that we're in a different location. I would always put scene slugs ahead of where these other girls are, but it's kind of irrelevant. I think we can picture that these are all just different people getting ready in the morning. We see 3 or 4 other girls, definitely are going to be a different type than Andy. Andy is going to stand out for being her own thing. Just like we see scene 1, Apple, one of the girls applies shiny lip gloss with a brush, whereas Andy just puts on cherry chapstick. And we see it go on like that, from the type of breakfast they're having to the shoes they're wearing. Finally, we get to the last scene. Andy straightens out a pile of newspaper clippings from the Daily Northwestern with the byline Andrea Sachs and proudly tucks them into her hideous college graduation present briefcase. And meanwhile, we see one of the other girls has some very trendy clutch. So that's an interesting route, something I hadn't seen before, where we are juxtaposing who our character is with a whole bunch of examples of what she isn't, which is great because this is such a fish out of water story. This is all about who she isn't. We have people kind of picking on her all the time because she's not glamorous enough to be working in the fashion world. And this fashion world is, of course, led by Meryl Streep playing Miranda. She first makes her appearance through a number of really short scenes as she's seen kind of glimpses of her as she's rushing through the building and assistants are coming and trying to get approval of something or trying to take an order, help her out. It begins here as she steps out of her car. We only see flashes of Miranda, what she's wearing. Not the complete picture yet. Manolo's Chanel jacket, Van Cleef earrings. Important to note, like, this is the type of detail I would not usually want in a screenplay, but this sets tone. And you're able to set tone through character description here because this is about fashion. So we're going to name drop the designer items that she's wearing. If it's a funny comedy, and if you can make someone laugh during a character description, you are setting tone right there for your reader, which is a great thing to do. Finally, we get the full picture of Miranda, steps out of the elevator, and for the first time, we see her head on. Miranda's look is so distinctive you can spot her a mile away. She's unlike any other beautiful woman, singularly Miranda. Now that is completely vague. Does that really give you a picture of who she is? No, but you do get the sense of who she is, even though it's not a literal description. They're almost describing, Eileen is almost describing her aura in this one. And it helps because she plays this almost godlike figure in this movie with a building full of people that kind of bow to her. And in full disclosure, I wanted to cover Patrick Bateman from American Psycho because he is such a unique and charismatic, complex character. but really he spends most of the movie talking about who he is. So that movie actually, in hindsight, doesn't actually need much character description. And in reality, the screenplay just mentions that Patrick Bateman is sitting at a table in an expensive custom suit with suspenders and has slicked back hair. That's all it says about him, because really, Bateman talks about himself so much, what he cares about, what he likes, what he dislikes, what his regimen is. He really covers all the character description within the film verbally as voiceover narration, so we don't need to see much of a character description. Also, I took a look at the third draft of the Godfather script by Mario Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola, and there was absolutely nothing there to describe the Godfather himself, Don Corleone. Nothing about how he carries himself, nothing about how he speaks. These very classic, identifiable things. These were all moments that apparently happened on set with Marlon Brando and Coppola, maybe between the two of them. Maybe that all appears in the character description. Whatever the case, it does not appear on the screenplay at all. So there's a new Resident Evil movie coming out very soon, and it made me wonder, what was the world's introduction to the video game character Alice in the very first Mia Jovovich movie? Let's take a look. And this is interesting. I do like elements of this because it reveals her as a character a little bit while also having some action and some description, scene description coming through. You know, most people would not like this page, as it is a lot of description. There's not any dialogue for a bit. I'm okay with it, but it's not the prettiest page to look at when you're talking about really crafting your page. Close-up eyes. Blue eyes snap open, woken from a bad dream. Widen to reveal a woman's face to go with the eyes. It's not perfection, but it's close. We'll call her Alice. Then goes on to describe the room she's in a little bit. Alice steps out of bed. She's 21, naked. I take it back. She is perfection. Okay, little male gazy there. But it does say that she's a woman who is obviously fit. And I guess that's about all. All it says about her right now is that she's in good shape and she is without clothes. We go through as she continues to walk around a little bit lost. And maybe it's fitting that there's not much of a description about who she is as a character, because as Alice stares at the weaponry, the look on her face says it all. Who am I? So we have a main character with amnesia, and us as the audience know as much as she does. So it's kind of interesting to make that decision that we are not going to let the audience in, the reader in at all on what's going on in this moment. Her character description is just as elusive as it is to her, because she doesn't know anything about herself either. One of the great writers of our time, Aaron Sorkin, has another movie coming out, and that is The Ricardos. Definitely looking forward to seeing that one. I was wanting to look back on the Trial of the Chicago 7. Again, it's a story where you have a lot of different characters. How do you keep them straight? Especially when you have a couple of characters that have some similar characteristics. I mean, you have, obviously, Abby Hoffman is off the wall. There's some really wild out there characters, the judge, the lawyer. There's a lot of very unique guys. What about a couple of characters that are very similar in general description? They're the straight-laced duo, and again, about the same age, and they're even from the same organization. How do you keep that straight on paper? Do you really take your time embellishing and writing out their character descriptions? Let's take a look. And the two specifically I wanted to look at were the characters of Tom Hayden and Rennie Davis, who were the leaders of the Students for a Democratic Society. So first, Rennie Davis, mid-20s, wearing a short-sleeve white shirt and tie, is speaking to a standing room-only crowd of students. In contrast to the cliche of the times, most of the students are fairly conservatively dressed. Tom Hayden, later on in the same scene, Tom Hayden steps out from the darkness. He's 30s, handsome, and serious. Not a lot different, to be quite honest with you. One guy is in his 20s, another in his 30s. And Tom, the character in his 30s, is the only one given any sort of a personality description, which is that he is serious. I think this may be part of why Aaron Sorkin needed to go this route, was because there's a lot of people to keep straight in this story. He was able to ID the two men with a chyron, Tom Hayden, Rennie Davis, leaders of the Students for a Democratic Society. So that does help, just flat out, plain as day, show to the readers and then show to the audience later who these people are. So that's an option too. You generally don't want to do that unless you really need to. I think Aaron Sorkin absolutely needed to, just because of the number of people in this movie. Taking a look at one of the greatest movie villains of all time, Hannibal Lecter. So we start first by getting a picture of Lecter's cell. You can get a lot of character description out of a scene setting if it is someone's house or bedroom, or in this place, their prison cell. So you do get a lot of character. Max Tim calls these windows. You can get all sorts of windows into who a character is via set dressing. I'm also somebody that really doesn't like to over describe sets, but when it matters, it matters. And you can get a lot of oomph out of little details like this. So anyway, first we start with Hannibal Lecter's cell, which is coming slowly into view. Behind its barred front wall is a sound barrier of stout nylon net, which is obviously quite different as it was plexiglass in the movie. Sparse, bolted down furniture, many softcover books and papers. On the walls, extraordinarily detailed, skillful drawings, mostly of European cityscapes in charcoal or crayon. Clary stops, a polite distance from the bars, clears her throat. And then we continue. Dr. Hannibal Lecter is lounging on his bunk in white pajamas, reading an Italian Vogue. He turns, considers her, a face so long out of the sun it seems almost leached, except for the glittering eyes and the wet red mouth. He rises smoothly, crossing to stand before her, the gracious host. His voice is cultured, soft. So I like that, where you get a little bit of a description about how the person talks. So we haven't seen that yet. Again, I thought that was so odd that we didn't get that with The Godfather, but I like his wet red mouth. Right away, there's something really creepy about just reading that line, saying it out loud to you, forcing you to hear me say that phrase. It unnerves the reader a little bit. And just that it's kind of it's a weird thing to say. It's a weird thing for the writer to call out, but it creates that feeling among me as I'm reading it. So that's, holy hell, that's great writing. And there's gotta be something to be said too about the use of color, or I guess in this case, the lack of, that he is very, very pale because he's been incarcerated for so long. He's wearing all white. There's almost no color about him at all, except for his eye color and of course his mouth. Something that seems maybe uncanny, maybe something a little off-put, like he's human, but a little bit different. That really works for creating that visual in this moment. Of course, also the artwork on the walls behind him, it's charcoal drawings on white paper, so black and white. A total absence of color, at least from the screenplay, as we're reading this again on black and white. I had to take a look at a great secondary character from the movie, major but secondary character from Crazy Rich Asians, played by Awkwafina. We hear another buzzer and the front door opens. Paik Lin, 29, emerges carrying one of her Pekingese dogs. Paik Lin is a half type A go-getter, half hip-hop, all attitude. Again, she's a fun character. There's a fun description that matches. All right, last thing I wanted to do, a little exercise. Maybe I'll do a whole video like this in the future and we can see if it's entertaining. I'm going to write how I would do a character description for a very famous character that you would all know, and can you guess it within just a sentence or two? So I'm not going to give the character name, obviously, but I'll say character, let's say 20s or 30s, meek in nature, dressed conservatively would be natural for his age. As he talks, his stare lingers just a little too long. Okay. Certainly, if I was writing within the scope of the scene, I would have some action as well, which would help me out a little bit in this exercise. But what do you think? What works for you? What are you feeling in this scenario? Is this a Ryan Reynolds type of character? Is this, obviously it's a male, I said his age, but is this a Hugh Grant type of character? Is this a Rob Zombie type of character? Well, let's see how Joseph Stefano described Norman Bates. All right, very minimal. Office of the Bates Motel night. The young man follows Mary in, closes the door. He is Norman Bates, somewhere in his late 20s, thin and tall, soft-spoken and hesitant. Okay, so we don't get too much. I wasn't sure if he was 20s or 30s, late 20s. Thin, tall. I didn't put that kind of character description in there. Soft-spoken. I meant to put, I said meek. I really, really fell in love with how Hannibal Lecter was described, that it kind of made me uncomfortable to read that line. I was trying to do something not quite as overt there, but something that gave you that uneasy feeling. The fact that his stare, that his gaze lingered too long. Big thanks to Final Draft for creating some great screenwriting software. I always welcome any comments, questions, critiques. please leave comments. Also, I want to do a future video that takes place in describing stuff that's off the wall. What is Beetlejuice's character description like? Edward Scissorhands, Freddy Krueger, what's their character description gonna look like? I haven't even looked at that kind of stuff myself. I'm kind of excited to do so. But until then, that's a wrap, and we'll see you on the next one.